This tutorial is going to serve as a guide for getting started quickly in InDesign, building a new document, learning some of the basic tools, and working with existing template that you can download for InDesign. We'll start with our homepage that comes up when we open up InDesign. We're going to click Create New and walk through just creating a new document. In here, you're going to see that you can give it a name, and we're just going to call it Template 1. One of the first things you'll notice is picas is a typical unit for page layout, but we're going to change that to something that's more familiar for us and do inches and have an 8.5 by 11 page as our template. Now it's 8.5 wide, 11 tall, so we're in a portrait orientation. One of the things we're going to check is facing pages. What this means is that it's a double-sided document, which means you'll have a cover as your first page, and then every subsequent page or pages will actually be a spread where two are next to each other. In this case, two 8.5 by 11s are next to each other, and it forms essentially an 11 by 17. Now we want to do that for our project, so we're going to check facing pages. We're going to bump the page number up to, we'll just start with 11 or some number. Right here you can see how easy it is to take pages away and add pages once we get in there. Now, some other helpful things as far as columns. If you are building this template, you might want to use columns to help you be consistent in your spacing of objects. You also have margins in here. We're going to leave ours at 0.5 inches. And bleed and slug, which is really important when you're doing edge-to-edge printing, especially if you're using an online printer. We're going to leave all these as the defaults for now and go ahead and click Create. You're going to notice that I'm using the Essentials workspace right here, at least to start, and we'll kind of walk through how this is different from the Essentials Classic, which is the one that we're going to use for the rest of the tutorial. You'll notice the properties for the different tools that you're using exist over here in a panel on the right side. You also have a Pages tab that's right here. If these aren't showing up, there's a couple things you can do. You can go to Workspace and click on Essentials and then Reset Essentials. It should look exactly like this. You can also find additional panels here just by going to Window and clicking on these panels right here. Now I'm going to go to Essentials Classic. It's just something that's more familiar for me. And what it also allows me to do is have both my pages open here on the right and a lot of the properties up here on the top. And so we'll work with this one as we move forward. There's a few other things that you want to be aware of. These magenta lines serve as the margins that we set, that half-inch margin, when we created the new document. But there's also some useful guides and grids that you can create that will help as you're sort of building your document and keeping things aligned. One of the guides is when you click on a ruler and sort of drag this down, you'll get this blue line. These can serve as horizontal, and of course you can grab from the left ruler to do vertical guides as well. I'll back up and take those off. Another helpful tool is if you go to View, Grids and Guides, you can show the document grid. If you have this set up, mine is set up at 1 inch and 8 subdivisions for my document grid. You can find that you can change those in InDesign, Preferences, and Grids. You'll see that I've got mine set up for a grid line every 1 inch with 8 subdivisions, and the color being light gray. Now, if you're on a Windows version of this, you'll have to go to Edit. It should be under Preferences. Potentially down at the bottom, you'll also see grids and guides to where you can customize that information. Now, the shortcuts for it, and I toggle between these often, is Command apostrophe to turn this grid on and off. As you're building your templates, what you might also want to do is go to the grids and guides and say snap to document grid. I use this often as well so that I can make sure that I'm snapping to 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch and keeping things nice and in alignment by snapping to that document grid. You'll see your pages over here on the right. As you remember, we set 11 up initially, and I can just add a page right here just by clicking this new page icon. You can delete a page by just dragging it to the trash can. So this is how we're going to move pages around. We have nothing on them right now, but we would click and drag these around, or you could hold Shift, select 2 pages at the same time, and move those entire spreads around. I'm going to double click on this page 1. It brings me back here, but you can also scroll up and down to navigate between the different pages in your document. Similar to Photoshop and Illustrator, you can hit Command minus to zoom out, Command plus to zoom in, and Command 0 to snap to the extents of that page. Now, as you're building your documents into InDesign, for me, there are 3 essential tools that you need to know. Now, obviously, there's more than these 3 tools, but the 3 that I think are the most important is this right here. So you've got a rectangular tool, and in this case, we'll just click and drag a rectangle right here, snapping to these grid lines, making sure that we go to View, Grids and Guides, and Snap to Document Grid. And as I create this shape, it's going to be a rectangle. You've obviously got more shapes underneath this with the ellipse tool and the polygon tool as well. I'm primarily using rectangles because these are going to be the frames by which I drag in my content. And they work, the fill and stroke work much like Illustrator. You've got a fill, which for me is nothing, and a stroke right now, which is nothing. We'll go to Window and Color, and I can open up the color themes, swatches, gradients. We'll just go with the base color, and obviously I can pick a color right from this slider right here to fill that. I can also click on the stroke and select a color there as well. Now in my properties up top, you can see that I can adjust the size of that stroke. For these images that we're going to put in, we're going to create frames that serve as placeholders for our content. I'm just going to hit the red slash for the stroke and just stick with a gray color or some sort of placeholder color for my frames that I'm going to build. Now, one of the other essential tools for me is the pen tool, and I hit P for pen. It brings up my pen tool, and this is how I'm going to create oftentimes tool lines in my drawings, maybe leaders that are pointing to things, and it's just clicking the shape and of course changing the stroke right there to a 0.5. In this case, I can obviously select a color, change that color, and as I click off and hide the grid, you can see this tool line here. I use this for creating lines and leaders to divide up maybe titles from subtitles, to annotate on top of plan view images if I'm creating a legend or adding in leaders that are pointing to certain objects. So the pen tool is a very useful tool. I'm doing a straight shape here, but you can also see that you can hold shift and do lines like this. Notice as you click and drag, what you'll get is what's called a Bezier curve, and you can create custom shapes in here. Now this shape right here has no fill or stroke, and of course as you add a stroke, it creates a solid line, and if I bring the fill to the front, it kind of fills in that shape. Most of the time I am just using a stroke, no fill for the pen tool, and I'm using a fill, no stroke for the shape tool, in this case a rectangle. The last tool is the type tool, and it is simply just clicking and dragging a box. You'll notice that if you are in the Essentials view, your Properties toolbar will give you all of these. If you're in Essentials Classic, like I am, across the top, you'll be able to select and type different things font-wise. Now, you'll notice that I'm just typing in something here. As you're building a template, oftentimes you're not typing in the contents that you need. Maybe you're saying something generic like a title. But for large bodies of text, what you might want to do is right-click and say fill with placeholder text. So I'm going to do that here. By right-clicking inside of it, we'll say fill with placeholder text. What this is going to allow me to do is get a feel for what that's going to look like once I put in the text, but I don't actually have to commit to writing in something right now. So I can turn down the size of the font. I can change the font to something I like, using Railway right now. What's also nice, you have that body text right there for maybe captions or a narrative, but you can also create a single line that's going to serve as a title. We'll bump this up. One of my favorite tools is, as we go to, let's type in Railway, we'll bold this. So we can actually click right here to go all caps and toggle between those two. That's always a helpful way. Instead of having to hit caps locks and retype everything, you can simply type it maybe as you have it in your notes, or you can type it all lowercase, and you can toggle between these two just from a stylistic standpoint. So these are the basic tools that we're going to use to create templates. I actually have one that's already created and that I'm going to use for the rest of this demonstration right here. So I've got a template that has a few things in it, and I'll sort of explain how they're going to work. We've got the document titles that just say document title. I'll obviously need to update that based on what we're looking at. And we've got our body text where we used fill with placeholder text just to give us something in the meantime. Now these gray boxes right here are actually going to serve as the content. The dark gray is just a stylistic thing that's going to serve as the backdrop for our text and title right here and obviously throughout the document. And so these gray squares, I like to have these in here just so I know that, yes, I need to fill something in this. I often use this same color in all my templates, but it really doesn't matter what you're using, just something visual to help you see what you're including. What I'm going to do in here is I'm going to go to File and Place. I'm going to navigate to some files here. I'm just going to go to a contents folder, and we're just going to look at a few things in here. Now, when you go to File Place, what this is going to allow you to do is to bring in outside content from maybe projects you've worked on that you're going to bring into your portfolio, and they can be a range of file types, JPEGs, PNGs, PDFs, or even PSD files. Because this is an Adobe product, it works really well with PSD files, in this case, like this being a Photoshop document. I'm going to say open for this, and I'm able to place this right inside of this frame. What it's going to do is it's actually going to fit into this frame right here. It's filled it all completely, but you notice that it's chopped off some of the top or bottom, so obviously your frames need to be somewhat oriented to what type of content you're using. In this case, what I can do to select this stuff is by getting the direct selection tool. I've been using the selection tool to click on objects in this case, but the direct selection tool actually clicks on the contents inside of that frame. You notice I can move it down and around in here. Now if I move it down too far, you'll notice that gray still remains, and you got to be careful about that, making sure that you're not showing that gray content there. Now, what's great about linking in documents is that they aren't embedded into what we're doing. So I'm going to take this and enlarge it just a little bit. We'll go ahead and commit to cropping out part of our site plan right here. But because it's linked, that it's not actually embedded in here, I can still make changes to this document. So what I'm going to do is actually go to my Photoshop file. I'm going to open up this PSD right here. And what I have the ability to do is just maybe change the color of something that I'm working on. So in this, I'll change it to maybe a lighter purple color. We'll say save on this. We'll let it save inside here and go ahead and close it and minimize this. And when I come back to my file, you'll notice that it still has the original orange color. But if I go to my links panel, which is this icon right here, and if it's not showing up, you can go to Window and Links. You're going to notice that the one link that we have in here, the one thing that we've placed and linked in, has a little exclamation point next to it. And it says that it's modified. Double click to update, or you can just right click on it and say update link. You'll notice that it updates with this view right here. Now in this, and this is a helpful way, even if you're doing JPEGs, you can just save over that exact same JPEG to update your file as you're working on it. You'll notice the resolution is really clean right here, and it's because there's different ways that you can actually view the content. If you right click out in space, just so somewhere off the page, you go to Display Performance, and High Quality Display is checked for me, but that's not often what I'm actually using. I often use what's called Typical Display, which makes it look a little grainier. And what that's doing is it's not going to export like this, but it just makes it easier as you're bringing in a bunch of stuff to where it doesn't actually bog down your InDesign file as you're just sort of scrolling through the pages. So consider right-click, Display Performance, and Typical Display as a working view of how you're going to do this. Now, File Place isn't the only way to insert contents in here. In fact, sometimes you might even drag and drop the contents from a Finder or Explorer window straight into your InDesign document. For me, I find this a little bit easier, and so oftentimes I'll sort of frame it up to where I've got my Finder right here. I'll just click and drag into this shape to bring in images. So what I'm going to do, I'll bring in these 3 boards and just drag them into the gray boxes right here so that we can see this content. Now in each of these, it framed up pretty well in here. If I grab my selection tool, I'll notice that it gets it pretty close to just filling the view, and I might even grab the direct selection tool and move it around to frame it up just exactly how I want it. There are times though where your contents might come in and it might be really large, right? And you might feel like I've got to zoom out and grab these handles and sort of bring them in, but there's a much quicker way for getting this contents to fit inside the frame. So what we're going to do, we'll grab our selection tool, we'll click on the frame, and then we'll right click on it and say go to our fitting tools. In this case, we've got 2 options that we're going to do right off the top. One is fill frame proportionally. What this means is that it's going to fill the frame but also maximize how much of the image you can see. I'll click that one first, and then when I click on the direct selection, you're going to notice that it fits just exactly to the width, to where we fit or fill the frame but still get to see as much of the image as possible. In this case, I'm going to use my arrow keys to nudge this up or nudge it down to get it just right. The other option is this. When we click on it and right click and go to fitting, we can fit contents proportionally. What this does is it fits the entirety of the content inside of it, but what you're going to notice in my case is that I've got these gray bars on either side. So it kind of depends on what you have as the image you're bringing in. For me, what I'm probably going to do in this case is right click and go to fitting and fill frame proportionally. You can see over here to the right is the shortcut. It's a lot of keys that you've got to hold. You've got Option, Command, Shift, and C, but what you'll find is that I actually end up holding all of those down and doing that quite often to help this content quickly fit into the scene. And so this is a way to kind of quickly drag contents, especially perspectives or a series of perspectives, into a document and have them sort of fit on there. Now, there are certain circumstances where scale might be really important and that you want to maintain that scale. And there's a couple tricks that you can do to make sure that you are holding to a known scale. If you click on the content using the direct selection tool, you'll notice that you still have the width and height of your contents right here. And if you knew that the original document was, let's say, a 24 by 36 or a 14 by 21 or something close to that, you could link these together and reset that to that exact size right there. Now you know that you've still got it to scale and you can reposition it inside of your image. So keeping in mind this tool right here being the direct selection, clicking on the content, you can still control the size of those contents. A helpful tip is if you have a 24 by 36 but you're shrinking it down to an 11 by 17, you know that that doubles the scale or takes a drawing that's 1 inch equals 40 feet and turns it into 1 inch equals 80 feet, and you just verify that you've cut it completely in half by going from 36 wide to 18 inches wide. Now, there are a couple last things when you are working with templates to keep in mind. Hopefully the template is set up pretty close to what you want to use and the order in which you want to use those pages, but maybe not always. In this case, we've got these 8.5 by 11s that are landscape and they're put together, and we like the way it's flowing, but maybe we want to put the site plan before the images in this case. So what we can do is we can do that a few different ways. We can highlight these pages, as we talked about before, and drag them up. You notice I'm dragging them to the left, and what that does is it places it in front of it, and it reorders our pages both in the pages view but also in this larger view right here. We might also really like a template that we only have once inside of here, or a page layout, a spread in this template that we like. So what I'm going to do is click right here on this page, and I'm going to create 2 new pages, and what it does is it creates them right after those pages right here. So what I'm going to do now is I'll highlight everything on this page. We'll say edit and copy, and instead of just zooming in and saying edit paste, which would just place it somewhere, oftentimes it gets it really close, but you're going to notice it's not exactly in line. It's a little bit less of a gap on this left side. I'm going to undo that. We're going to say edit paste in place. What this does, it locks in where it is on the page, and it's going to put it exactly where we want it. Now, I've copied this with the contents, but I can just grab the direct selection tool, click on the contents, hit delete, click on these contents, hit delete, and delete. And so you can copy pages much, like we copy any other content. You are highlighting it, saying edit copy, edit paste in place. You also have the option to grab or highlight both of these pages in your pages panel and drag them over a new page icon. Gets a little choppy because in this case it creates them at the very end of your pages, so I need to grab this page right here, which is page 14, and drag it down so that it sort of jumps back and gets the orientation a little bit better. And of course, if I want to move these around, again, I'm dragging them here and repositioning. Same thing goes for deleting. If you are unhappy with a spread, maybe we created this one and we decided we didn't need it after the fact, I'm just going to drag this to the trash can right here. Now, after you create a lot of this content, maybe it's going to be helpful for you to do a preview to see what this looks like. And there's a couple ways to do a preview. I often turn the grid off, and it gives you a good feel for what this is going to look like. I often have, and I already in this case do, go to the extras, and you can see the frame edges here. I've turned mine off, but most of the time by default you're going to see all these frame edges that have the blue boxes, and you can turn those off in View, Extras, and Hide Frame Edges. But probably the most traditional way to get a view of this is to go to View, Screen Mode, and click Preview. What this does, it kind of whites out everything off the page, turns off all the frames. You can still hover over and change the content, but it gives you a better feel for how this is going to lay out. There's also a screen mode for presentation, where it takes you into a full screen mode and you can cycle through the pages using your arrow keys. So this is a basic overview for getting started using InDesign, creating your own templates, or how to use existing templates and modify them for your own projects. It's important to keep in mind the scale of your drawings. It's also important to make sure that you're not distorting the content. Very easily you can grab these selection tools, and if you're using these side handles, you can really start to distort what's happening, and it's really important to keep a focused eye on what you're doing so that you can critique your own work and make sure that you're not creating issues in this process. In general, InDesign is going to be a really powerful tool for doing board layouts and multi-page documents like we're doing in this case, whether that's for a personal portfolio or for a professional office as you're putting together project booklets.